You're watching F5 at Black Hat USA 2022. I'm Peter. We're in booth 2041. If you're at the show, come on by. Automated attacks continue to wreak havoc and cause headaches for organizations. These malicious bots can consume bandwidth, can skew business insight, and can even take over accounts if you're not careful. But for us, it's pretty cool. We have an expert here. He's a former CIA cyber ops officer, a former human click farmer, which is perfect for any resume, I think. And currently, he's F5's global head of intelligence. Dan Woods, such a pleasure to see you.
Happy to be here.
So, automated attacks, big topic these days. It has been for a number of years. So really, in its purest form, what are automated attacks and what are some of the things they can do?
I think simply put, an automated attack is anything that needs to be done over and over and over and over again in order to monetize. I think the best example is probably a credential stuffing attack where somebody has to try hundreds of thousands, millions, or even billions of username password pairs against the login form of some other company's login application. And because of consumer habits to reuse passwords, these attacks are taking over 0.1 to 3% of the accounts they attempt. So when you're trying hundreds of millions or billions, you end up taking over an awful lot of accounts. But it isn't just credential stuffing. Look at social networking companies. Think about the incentive a state actor might have to use automation against the create account workflow. Right. I mean, what kind of influence can a state actor have if they controlled millions of social media accounts? They can make things trend. They can influence public opinion, all sorts of things. Also, say add to cart. You think those people who want those limited time offer sneakers, or concert tickets, or the next iPhone. They might use automation against the add to cart application just to get that item before anyone else does, and then they sell it on the secondary market. And we've done the math on some of these limited time offer attacks isn't really the right word, but automation against the limited time offer, the add to cart endpoint. These organizations are making millions of dollars by buying those sneakers before anyone else can and then selling them on a secondary market.
Like concert tickets too, eh?
Exactly, yeah. And not all automation is a malicious attack. Like the add to cart example, there are other examples. Maybe the fare scraping at hotels and airlines. Third parties and competitors will spend a lot of time just, like for example in a hotel, they'll put in a city and a date and they'll pick a room and now they know the price for that room. And then they'll pick a different city, a different date, a different room, and they know the price for that room. And then they repeat it millions and millions of times in order to figure out what their competitors' fares are. And they'll do this for airlines as well. The downside to this, it may seem like it's harmless, it's not. Once you pick a room, you'll typically see in the reservation that room or that seat on the airplane is being held for 15 minutes to give you an opportunity to complete the reservation. Well, this automated scraping is going to freeze all the inventory for 15 minutes. So there's a significant cost associated with not just the malicious automated attacks, but the automation that is, maybe a nuisance or otherwise unwanted.
Right, and I remember you said at one point organizations have no idea just how much of this kinds of traffic is hitting their systems and infrastructure. What are some of the things they should look for in identifying these types of attacks?
Well, first let's talk about why they're missing so much of the attack traffic. For years, these enterprises have been blocking these attacks by IP address.
Right.
And as a result, the attackers have become much more geographically distributed. They're coming from all over the world and from millions of IP addresses. So organizations are typically pretty good at identifying, the top 100 or 1,500 noisiest IPs, but they miss the long tail of hundreds of thousands, even millions of IPs that are used one or two times. So this is why the organizations are missing them. Another reason, by the way, is these attacks didn't just come out of nowhere. They started years ago and have slowly ramped up in velocity and volume. So, because it didn't appear overnight, it wasn't as apparent and obvious to see. So now what can they do? I'm a firm believer that the only way to detect these sorts of attacks, now that they're using one IP address one time, is to use client-side signals. That's the first point. You have to collect client-side signals. So you interrogate the browser, the the device, you look at the way the user is interacting with the application, mouse movements, keystrokes, those sorts of things. And you look at all that, and if you collect the right client-side signals, like we have a couple that are a bit more advanced, like how does the user agent and device do floating point math? How does it render emojis? With all of these signals, we're able to tell with very high confidence whether or not the traffic is good or bad. But it isn't enough to have client-side signals. There's a second thing that's very important, and that is you have to expect the attacker to retool. So you have to have a second stage, and this is where your AI and ML that is human supported, that's very important. AI and ML is not ready to be blindly trusted, making decisions as to whether or not to mitigate a transaction. You must have human-supported AI and ML. So the humans are poring over all those alerts, looking for any false positives or false negatives. So you have the client-side signals that help you make a real-time determination. Then you have a second stage of human-supported AI and ML, looking for anything you missed, because attackers retool. And then you need the ability to update that real-time defense every time you find something in the retrospective analysis that you've missed.
Yeah, so a constant back and forth with the adversaries. Now, what do you say to organizations that say, but Dan, I got CAPTCHA, shouldn't that solve everything?
Well, I think years ago it probably did, but now bad actors, they've pivoted. They now use human click farms to solve CAPTCHAs. And as you mentioned in the intro, I went to work for a Russian human click farm. I went through their training, I went through their evaluation. They wanted to make sure I could solve CAPTCHAs quickly enough. And then I started solving CAPTCHAs for bots, I presume. And I think I had solved 40 or 50 CAPTCHAs, and I hadn't earned 1 penny US yet. So it's very exploitative. But as long as there are humans willing to sit, somewhere and solve CAPTCHAs all day long for bots, then CAPTCHAs are just going to be a speed bump for the motivated actor.
So how do you see this progressing? Like, do you think we'll get a kind of a hand up on them over the next couple of years? Do you think it's still going to be pretty messy as we continue through?
Oh, we've already got the upper hand. F5, our bot prevention, it stops them. In fact, that sometimes we're a victim of our own success. We'll go in line, we deploy our client-side signals, we have our second stage of human-supported AI and ML, and after a couple of weeks, months of doing battle with these attackers, they'll typically move on to a softer target.
Yeah.
And then, when it comes time for renewal, the security team saying, well, maybe we don't need them anymore. So the few that have taken us out have seen the attackers return. So it's always better to keep the countermeasure in place. But look, I have no doubt that, if anybody's using F5 bot defense, then their bot problems are over.
You heard it here first, or probably about the 100th time that you've said that over the time. Fascinating stuff, Dan. We really appreciate your time. Whole bunch of information about automated attacks, what to look for, and literally how to mitigate against such attacks. Appreciate your time, Dan. Always nice seeing you. We got Boo and Aubrey behind the camera. Hey, Aubrey. For Dan, I'm Peter, and we're with F5 Networks. Thanks for watching.